Sizin ev nerede? Ben de kalıyorum. Tabii. Ama kesin tabii annemizde. Nasıl öyle bir konferans mı vardı? Defne. O ne yapıyordu? Kahvede yapıyordu. Üniversite kahvede.
Kalimera σας, good morning. Merhabalar. We have to start the session, and the title of the last session of this conference is Survival and Memory. And the first presentation is by Mr. Leonidas Moiras and Alexandros Lambrou, the memories of the Greek occupation of Smyrna as they are reflected on the Turkish Press. Please.
Okay, thank you for the invitation. It's a really great honor to be here among you. I will read the presentation entitled The Memories of the Greek Occupation of Smyrna as they are reflected on the Turkish Press. We elaborated with my friend and my colleague Alexandros Lambrou, and I have to declare that it is an early stage survey of the Izmir Press regarding the ways the Greek occupation was narrated between 1923 and 1929. So our aim is to contextualize the occupation narratives in the public memory of World War I and the official ideology of the young republic as it was being shaped in the post-war years. In that sense, we wish to discuss the potential impact of these early narratives of the occupation and the corresponding images of Greece and Greeks had on the construction of the canon of official history in Turkey. We have examined the copies of 5 local newspapers, identify and analyze a number of overriding themes with reference to the historical and local sociopolitical context. To begin with our survey, the most prominent theme of the occupation memories in the Izmir Press is that of the Greek atrocities. In this so-called Mezalim literature, the occupation is primarily, if not solely, narrated in terms of atrocities and Greeks, the Greek army, local Greeks and Armenians as the perpetrators of several evils. Greeks, Yunan and Rum were described with words denoting savagery and bestiality like rabid, bandits, savagery, butchering as the most atrocious enemy, and I quote, "A rabid monster which sunk its claws into our hearts. The dirty boots of the Greek army trampled the seafront of Smyrna, the cordon, while the blue and white rags, the Greek flag, were hung on the Turkish barracks of the city." The cruelties committed by the Greeks were described vividly, aiming to create strong emotions. I quote, "The soldiers, guided by syphilitic prostitutes carrying pistols or axes, their teeth fallen from syphilis, their mouths pouring out dirty blood, they were repeating the Greek national anthem. They were shouting and screaming. It was during this shouting that the bayonets on top of the guns, the bullets inside of them, and the knives in the hands of whores and bastards started to turn against the Turks. A couple hours later, the streets, the park, were full of dead bodies." According to the Turkish press, the reason that triggered the Greek occupation of Smyrna was the policy of the imperialistic Western powers and the age-long hostility of the Greeks, that is, Megali there, and their passion to satisfy the feeling of revenge they were carrying for centuries. Authors perceived the Greek occupation of Smyrna as the darkest experience of the city, during which fear, victimhood, humiliation, and helplessness prevailed. In this context, Ahenk asked readers of the newspaper to share their memories of the Greek occupation. The published letters focused on the violence of the Greek forces and their collaborators, occasionally including short Greek expressions to provide for authenticity. And here I think, Aleko, you can show the... yeah, it's obvious. K, Elif, Mim, Vav, Gamoto, Turko, etc., etc. We found it interesting. So, in 1924, Ahenk wrote, "Let us not forget that today is the anniversary of 15 May, the events of which are known to all of us. Today, we have a duty, namely to honor and revere those who were killed, and later, to curse the bandits and murderers, and even later, to refresh the desire for revenge. It is also our duty to know the value of loving each other and uniting through love." Maybe it's a call for fraternity or brotherhood in the stillborn state. I don't know. Most anniversary editorials urge their readers not to forget and be revengeful. This commemoration facilitated the construction of a sense of solidarity based on the memory of common sacrifice. But what immediately strikes the reader is the banality of the expressions and the narrative employed, and the commonality with state elite atrocities literature, the mezzanine, to find in previous and contemporary propagandistic publications, especially following the Balkan War defeat. I can say during the siege of Edirne, we can see this culture of defeat, according to Yalgino. With the passage of time, the reproduction of the atrocity discourse was declining, usually confined in unoriginal, repetitive texts during anniversaries. For instance, Ahenk's editorial on 50th of May 1926 was identical word to word to the previous years. Equally, by 1928-1929, even commemorative articles would mention Greeks or Greece less, or even not at all, increasingly referring to enemies, or place Greece next to other adversaries, such as the traitor Sultan, England, France, Italy. For instance, there was no mention of Greece or Greeks in the commemorative editorials in 15th of May and 9th of September of 1929 of Ahenk, Anadolu, and his Izmir. The rapprochement with Greece by the end of the decade was probably a factor. Given the pressing problems the city and its inhabitants were facing throughout the 1920s, lack of interest by the consuming audience might be another factor. Given the extent of the unoriginality and shallowness of the narrative, one might also ask, who was or was not reading the texts? Consider the local newspapers were also publishing sober articles on the politics and commerce of Greece, sent by correspondents from Athens, that is, not copy-pasted from the Anatolian agency Anadolu Ajans, which was the case with foreign news. Apparently, there was a specific local demand for news from Greece among many recent Greek-speaking refugees from Greece, mainly from Crete, as Greek newspapers were also sold well in 1930s. This is also very interesting. Within official discourse, politics, and state-society relations, the function of this atrocity narrative was to validate claims over material and political resources, but also to counter adversary propaganda, especially the type based on the condemnation of atrocities. The emphasis on the adversaries' atrocities counters their own atrocity narratives, but also silently justified the atrocities perpetrated by the Turkish side before and after the occupation, seen as a reaction to the treason and savagery of Greeks and Armenians. Plus, the Young Republic's nation-building project was underway, as was the construction of its official public memory. In that respect, there was a clear tendency to include Armenians as perpetrators, however insignificant their contribution might have been, and in asking for statements from the occupation to be published in its first page, Ahenk asked potential contributors to write not only what I quote, not only what you suffered from Greeks, but also by Armenians, the local Greeks, the Rooms, and the other cursed elements. The insistence on exposing Armenian atrocities had the obvious aim to refute or even covertly justify ethnic cleansing on their side, which is a conspicuous silence over events that were common knowledge. Yet, beyond that, it also very much had to do with the issue of Armenian properties to be claimed back by returning Armenians, who, unlike Ottoman Greeks, were not officially prohibited from returning. The Turkish state was doing its utmost to avert this possibility, and the press demonizing the treacherous Armenians was also disqualifying any Armenian claim over national property or land. These relations of anti-minority discourse and practice with considerations over material resources was also evident in the inclusion of local Jews and their depiction as treacherous collaborators of the invading Greeks, which started as early as July 1923 by the newspaper Turkcesi. In turn to the depiction of local Greek Orthodox, they are, in par with the Greek army, mentioned almost exclusively in connection to violence, as rooms are shown to perpetrate atrocities and express pride in having killed or tortured Turks. The Greek Orthodox people of Smyrna were the ungrateful who followed Chrysostomos like the hordes of the barbarian crusaders following Peter the Hermit and attacking the Turks, the religious dimension of the depiction of the enemy, in the depiction of the enemy. What is more, they are always depicted as traitors who had been preparing for their treason for centuries. And it is their treason which justifies both their expulsion, which is not but faintly implied, and the denial of any claims on Izmir. They were simply traitors, not real citizens or children of this country. To quote a rare article referring to the Anatolian Greeks in Athens, I quote, "The fire starter, Kundakçı, Armenians and rooms, set in fire all the seafront of Smyrna. The gang of the Evzones attempted to satisfy their lust by turning their homeland to ruins. Those who left Anatolia went to Greece, and now they are making a place called New Smyrna and a new church called Agafotini. They mention that they were saved from the Turks' knife and fire to live in a free country. This is a characteristic sample of the Greek madness and arrogance. We only fought and died for the country and left poor while they got rich, and now they complain about the destroyed Izmir. But who destroyed Izmir? What is not the dirty and bloody hands of the diabolic priests who burn it together with Hagia Fotini?" What the article conveys is very straightforward. They cannot have any claim on Izmir. They destroyed, and we are rebuilding Izmir. Also, there does not seem to be any sober depiction of Anatolian Greek Orthodox, and beyond the aforementioned cliché depiction of as treacherous thugs, the Anatolian Greeks are conspicuously absent. To relate to some of the inspiring thoughts of Hamid Bozarslan and Torsten yesterday, we may argue that the Anatolian Greeks, the past of Izmir, were narratively exiled from any meaningful presence in the past, present, and future of the city of Smyrna. Apart from that, Greeks are only mentioned exceptionally. In a number of cases, it was not uncommon to mention their attempts to justify someone's political credentials or to discredit opponents. Apart from the expected local Jew accused of collaboration, there were also cases of Turks accused. The opposite was also commonly used. Participation in the fight against the invading Greece and the treacherous Rooms or Armenians was used as a political capital. And as Elinor Morak has argued, refugees are also mentioned their suffering in the hands of the Greeks as a narrative technique to justify claims over abandoned property, the emvalymetrike issue, as you know. Lastly, Greece was habitually mentioned in relation to the commerce, and especially Greek products that competed the local export products. Very common are data on the production and export, prices of currents, dried fruits, tobacco, bonitos, etc., etc. In one rare occasion, the carpet production, the commercial competition was explicitly related to the Anatolian Greeks, who had initiated the production and turned Greece into, I quote, the only country that today works to destroy us completely, taking the production from our hands. To put the above narratives in context, we need to mention that the overarching consensus of the local press during the 1920s was not Greece, but the city's reconstruction, rebuild, development, etc., etc., the refugee issue, the reforms and politics of the periods. Next to these themes, the texts referring to the occupation occupied but a small space that was diminishing over time. So, to conclude, at this point, it is important to denote, to underscore, that after the proclamation of Turkish Republic, the image of Greeks and Rome's population as the vicious enemy of the Turks started to fade away. The Turkish-Greek rapprochement and Turkish foreign policy in the 1930s and the re-evaluation of the Ottoman Turkish past, it is within context that we may understand the conceptual shift of the part where Greek and Greeks played in the official narrative as they transform from the absolute enemy to instruments of the great powers and the secondary enemy. The priority was to confront other menaces like the palace, then the elements of backwardness and the ignorance. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. I just forgot to mention that Mr. Leonidas Moiras is adjunct faculty member at the National and Kapodistrian University of Athens, and the co-author, Lambrou Alexandros, is a guest researcher at Philipps University in Marburg. So, next presentation entitled Chasing the Ghost of Smyrna in Modern Izmir, Ruptures and Shifts in the Memory Narratives of Turkish People. The paper is presented by Ms. Özgür Kaymak and Defne Suman. Thank you very much. Özgür Kaymak is a lecturer at Middle East Met University in Istanbul, and Defne Suman is from novelist. Yeah, very good. Very good. So, floor is yours.
Okay. And then on this one, click there, here, there is exactly, and then on this one, this one, yes, this one, no, yes.
Okay.
Nice. Okay.
And but we also have a video in the middle. So how am I going to? Okay, sorry.
Okay.
It's not in the slide. It's well, I'll do it.
Okay, we'll manage.
If I can't, I'll show it at the end.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for all coming. So I start, Defne Hocam.
Yes, please.
Okay. The new Turkish Republic constructed an official memory narrative in which the violent past is silenced, and the cosmopolitan demographical structure of the Ottoman Empire is erased or represented as one of the weak points of the empire, which led in the later years to its demise. Izmir, in this context, appears as a unique example, as the displacement of non-Muslim communities from the city happened much faster and in a more aggressive manner compared to other towns of Turkey due to the Great Fire of Smyrna and the looting of city by the victorious Turkish army on the days preceding the fire. One can argue that it took only a few weeks for Izmir's Armenian and Greek population to be erased not only from the topography of the city, but also from the memory of the new nation. Defne Suman's international best-selling novel, The Silence of Scheherazade, which is going to be our presentation topic today, is actually the first fiction work by a Turkish author that breaks the prevailing silence around the Great Fire of Smyrna and the atrocities against the Christian population. The book is not only revealing, but also questions how we, Turkish people, grew up ignorant of the past atrocities that haunt the Turkish nation-building project.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming on a Saturday morning to listen to us. Well, I'm going to move on from here. So you can see the Silence of Scheherazade in Turkish, Emanet Zaman, in Greek, Isiopiti Scheherazade, has been quite a bit of an international best-selling novel, even to my surprise, because it has a very complicated plot. So what it is about, I mean, this paper is not about the book, but more something else, but I'm going to give you a very quick, a few sentences what the book is about. It's the story of Smyrna from 1905 until 1922, and it's told from 4 female perspectives. It's told from the inside of the Smyrna, 4 women living in Smyrna, and how they experienced the years of 1905, how they grow up, grow old, and how they lived the loss of the city. So I would say the book is mainly a mourning for everyone, even the ones who, quote-unquote, won the city. And I would even argue, not that today we're going to do that, in the future if we get together again, because it's a female-based point of view, and it's a loss from every aspect. Video. Okay. So what do we do? And what we want to show you now is this little video. Oh, sorry. Sorry, I'm going to put the subtitles. And we begin again.
This is actually the memory of the book.
That's our paper about.
Yok olan kentin yüzyılının o yaşamın o hafızanın içinde bugün. Lamarck'ın en küçük çocuğu. Bornova'da uçsuz bucaksız bir arazinin ortasında yer alan koca bahçeli tacir bir konakta doğmuştur. Diyelim ki burada.
Şimdi Süpürlerin evini düşünecek olursanız, Süpürlerin evine gelen bir Tevfik Bey var. Çarşı içindeki ticari hanların aksine, burası yolcuların konaklaması için düzenlenmişti. Binanın sokağa bakan ön cephesinde dizilmiş 3-4 dükkan vardı sadece. Avlunun etrafına dikilmiş daireler boş ama tertemiz. Katerina Kilisesi buradaymış ve işte her mahalle kilisesinden alıyor. Katina Panayota'ya bir bakış fırlatıyor. İnatçı sıpa yüzünü yere eğmiş, uçları kumur pabuçlarını seyrediyordu. Salonun duvar kenarlarına dizilmiş tahta sıralar ağırbaşlı bir sessizlik içinde yolcularını bekliyor. Hilmi Rahmi oturdu. Ben de yanımda. Ellerimi kucağımda kavuşturdum. Duvarlarda asılı kocaman ablak suratlı saatler olmasa istasyonda değil de kilise sıralarında oturduğunu sanabilirim. Edip yatak odasının penceresinden bakarak günün ilk ışıklarıyla pembeye kesmiş bahçesine bakıyordu. Şuradan Edith'i düşünebilirsiniz hepiniz. Edith'in penceresine bakabilirsiniz. Beraber bulunduğunuz için çok teşekkürler.
So, nation-state formation is always a special project. Thus, the Great Fire, in this sense, can be interpreted both as a profound act of destruction and an act of creation. The eradication of Ottoman spaces and the creation of new spaces as places of memory. The fire in Izmir represents a symbolic moment when the spatial and temporal continuity of Smyrna, Izmir, was broken. In this sense, we may argue that memory debates create an awareness of the catastrophic experiences of the national past and draws attention to the once neglected suffering of the previously voiceless victims.
So as you watched in the little video we produced, we do book tours or memory walks in Izmir, and I show the readers the places where the certain chapters of the book are taking place. And so it's a organization called Nomad Mind, and with the support of another organization called Bayeta, we organize these walks, and the participants, they are asked to read the book, so they have an idea what we're doing, and they're quite popular, and every year we do like 2 of them and take these people around. So we begin from the old Muslim neighborhoods. We take the participants from Kemeraltı all the way up to the Namazgah Tilkilik, which used to be today Anafartalar Street, and Hatuniye Mosque, and slowly take them towards the Basmane station. The reason why we begin from there is because we wanted to show them what remained in order to have a contrast of the north of Basmane station, what got lost.
Okay, so let me briefly talk about the demographics of the participants. We made an informal survey consisting of short questions with the 16 people who participate in the memory walk of the Silence of Scheherazade. 12 of them defined their gender as women, 3 of them as men, and 1 of them as non-binary. The average age of the participants is 42, and most of them reside in Izmir. Almost all of them are university graduates. 3 of them hold PhD. Another point that can be considered important in the context of our discussion is that the families of the majority of the participants are migrants, the ancestors, such as their family origins are from Bosnia, Albania, Georgia, Crete. In summary, the participants are middle-aged, well-educated, have modern lifestyles and practices, and most of them belong to middle class.
So participants who live either outside of Izmir or in the modern areas such as Alsancak or Bostanlı express their surprise at the existence of such spaces. This is in Muslim neighborhood, we're still in the old Muslim neighborhood, okay? And their own ignorance. This is mostly the Izmir residents. Oh, how I didn't know these places exist. Now, these areas today are poor, run down, and some are inhabited by Syrian refugees. And I particularly observe them if they understand, if they see the similarity, the parallelness of the refugeeness of the Syrians coming to Izmir and what they read in the book, the Greeks of Izmir coming to Athens as refugees and settling in Nea Smyrna and Paleophalliro and all those neighborhoods. To be honest, I don't see that they it doesn't click for them that it's the same situation. So we can come to that during the discussion to that point. Here I try to imply the similarities of Greek refugees, for example, Bakkal Akis's life in Zenea Smyrna, and the Syrian refugees in present-day Izmir. Even though old and unfamiliar, the fact that the buildings, hotels, homes lasted up to this year, up to this day, becomes a striking reality when we pass Basmane station and stop at Basmane entrance at Kültür Park. So then we arrive, here we are at the Kültür Park. We take a small break here and announce that from now onwards we are moving into the lost land, that the very place we are standing right now was the Armenian neighborhood and the point where the Great Fire of Smyrna started. The park we are about to enter was a large area where many Greek neighborhoods existed with churches, schools, and people. So, and then I read here a slow chapter, not a chapter, a small piece from the book, and I'm going to read this to you here. And as I slept, my beautiful, complicated, labyrinthine city burned. Sailors on ships out at sea mistook the smoke shrouding Smyrna for a giant mountain. Journalists in distant countries reported the news, and photographs of our ghost city became headline stories. They hastily started rebuilding the city. Ayakaterina, Ios Dimitris, Ios Trifonas, our neighborhood, Frank Street, and the joyful world of decay has all been reduced to ashes. They smashed our houses, our bakeries, and our little squares to dust, and built huge roads on top of them. There was no one left to call it Smyrna anymore. In one night, hundreds of thousands of citizens who had lived there for centuries disappeared into nothingness. After 40 days and 40 nights, no one honored them. Church bells were silenced forever. It was only the ghosts that roamed the ruins that remembered the past and me. So this is an excerpt from The Silence of Shehrazad, and the drawing of Smyrna house is by our friend Yorgos Poulimenos here. We turn to you.
Okay, thank you. The fire had no significant place in public memory. Therefore, national collective memory in this sense is simultaneously rooted in a form of collective amnesia and selective memory. The feedbacks we received from the participants also confirms this gap in the collective cultural memory regarding the fire of Smyrna fire and Izmir's past. On the other hand, almost all participants mentioned that the memory talk was a turning point for them, and the way in which they perceive the space, the city, the Izmir, up to that time in their lives is altered at that moment. Almost all of them stated that they faced this unknown, covered side of the past for the first time. They also begin to feel the pain and empathize simultaneously. In other words, they began to actually explore their own city and their past. As one participant stated, I quote, "When historical narratives are combined with human stories, a more vivid and concrete perception develops in the minds, enabling imagination of the underground layers."
So here are a few things that we have collected from them, what they say. Very briefly, I'm going to read you and you can read from there. We translated them together. The gardens of the park that we enjoyed was once upon a time the neighborhood of Panayota, and it burned down to ashes. It's very sad to think that it all disappeared, and it's such a large area. I'm now thinking if we dig what is underneath us, so much unknown will come alive. After the book tour, I clearly understood the history of the town, its suffering and destruction. I was shocked finding out that not a trace was left from the Greek neighborhood. I realized that Izmir too was a wounded city. So Kültür Park specifically, I will never see, hold on, I think it's in the next one. No, it's here. Okay. I will never see Kültür Park like the way I have seen it up until now. Is many times I heard this. So inside the Culture Park, we take the participants around and count the names of the old Greek neighborhoods that existed in this area, and it's not just one, so we've emphasized that. For people who are Izmir residents, and for many who visited the town in their childhood, Culture Park Fuar is linked to good memories of childhood, of Luna Park, entertainment, horse carriages, cotton candy, and summertime. The realization of that very space being the home to many Greeks, residents of Smyrna, only 100 years ago back, and it burned down to ashes completely, brings out a great surprise and shock in participants. I remember one person asking over and over in disbelief if there were really neighborhoods here, houses, schools, and everything. She asked in these details. To make the realization more powerful, we showed them Kaskatlı Havuz, where you can see the photo of me there, not so far from where Ayakaterini Church used to be, and asked them to imagine the pool being the church. It's not there, but it's very close. We remind them somewhere nearby, under their feet, is most likely the ruins of Ayakaterina Church, as well as thousands of other houses. No wonder one of the answers to our questionnaire is, you have seen this. The garden of the park that we enjoyed was once upon a time the neighborhood of Panayota, and it burned down. So we continue the tour toward the north of town, and we draw a contrast between the still intact old buildings like French consulate, Arkas, like French hospital, which is the Alsancak Devlet Hastanesi today, English hospital, Alsancak railroad station, and other places that are still there. So without imposing on the participants, we are hoping that they grasp the fact that Izmir's pre-Republican past is erased systematically. So what is erased is picked, and what will remain from the past remains. And there's no trace from the Greek and Armenian past of the town, while the Catholic, yesterday we talked about this, while the Catholic and Protestant population's culture and historical heritage is still alive and visible in modern Izmir. So we point that out to them. And then
Yes, we continue.
So then we come to the end, and we finish the tour at Gündoğdu Meydanı, which is a new square in Izmir, like 20-25-year-old as far as I know. It's rather new and frequently populated by young people. It's seen as the continuation of Cordon, Key, Green Park area where youngsters drink and hang out in mixed gender groups, which could be and should be regarded as a political resistance in itself. The square, with the statue of Izmir's liberation at its center, has ambiguous connotations in town's residents' minds. On the one hand, it's the new space for official ceremonies. We can say that it replaced Konak and Cumhuriyet Square. At the same time, it's a gathering spot for public demonstrations. For example, during Istanbul's Gezi Park resistance, Izmir's residents gathered at the Gündoğdu Square to protest the existing power structure, existing government. So in our tour, Gündoğdu Square has a particular significance. If the entrance of Culture Park triggers a shift in the perception of city's history and present-day planning, at the Gündoğdu Square, we finally reveal the big picture that the book and its tour has been subtly emphasizing up to that point. In this big picture, participants see young Panayota, a young Greek woman from Smyrna in our book, young Panayota entering the quay, running with her hair and skirt ablaze, next to her a horse in flames. So how is our time? I don't know. I can read it or I might skip this. So I read this to the people, and this is how they listen around me. The creature, half horse, half fire, and the goddess with skirts ablaze, burst onto the bright orange quay at Bella Vista at the same moment. Their faces were crimson, and white halos encircled their heads. People screamed at the sight of them and huddled even closer together. There was nowhere to escape to. The incandescent pair reached the middle of the quay and stopped, glancing first at the dark water and then each other. The girl smiled, the horse neighed. The decision had been made. As one, they moved toward the water. After the reading of this passage, so this is our final. Okay. After reading of that piece, there is usually a silence, which is followed by a discussion about revisiting the memorized bits of history. Most participants state or confess that they have never thought of Victoria's phrase, casting Greeks into the sea at the end of Turkish independence war, in this context. They never thought that there were women, children, old people, residents of Smyrna, Ottoman citizens and civilians in the Greeks who are casted to the water. And after the book, mostly after the tour, there's perception of the key as well as their understanding of Izmir and official history have changed drastically. So I want to say one last thing before giving the word to my friend Özgür here. So I think through the world of fiction, we're allowing participants to fill the gaps in history on their own. And I find it very valuable. We do this through literature, because literature doesn't impose on them to be on any side. It's from the inside of the characters we present what happened, and then by connecting to them, if there's a gap in the memory, they fill it. And if they want to do further research and fill more gaps, most of them said that they actually were more interested in finding out what really happened in 1955 in Istanbul, 1964 in Turkey, and all those things. So I think the story and its experience in space offer an experience for them to question and possibly break the walls established in social and personal prejudices and belief patterns and class, ethnicity, elitism, nationalism. All those walls shatter once you put a question mark of the memorized past. So we believe that the seeds of a more inclusive understanding and empathy are planted in these moments.
Yes, okay. After a minute. So as a conclusion, we may argue that because of its, as Defne Hocam very well stated, because of its ability to give imaginative access to stories and experiences that transcend that and cross borders, art has this power to transcend the boundaries of top-down official memory narratives. The memory walk of the Silence of Shehrazad aims to draw attention to the silencing of non-Muslims' lives, unthought and unknown lives of them, and struggles in the city of Izmir. Also, these tours have the potential to offer clues about the interconnection between memory, space, and self. And it offers the possibility for mobilizing silenced memories. Yes, alternative readings, on the contrary to official historical theses, are therefore taking place. And we consider this as a progressive step, hopefully, toward a society that is more open-minded, pluralistic, reinforcing mutual understanding and empathy. Thank you for all listening.
Thank you very much. The next presentation is by Ms. Erol Merih, is Associate Professor at Özgür University, and the title of his presentation is The Smyrna Fire in the Testimonies of the Armenian Survivors.
Okay, welcome everyone. I would like to extend my thanks to the Department of Turkish Studies and Modern Asian Studies of Kapodistrian University of Athens for this invitation that gives me the opportunity to talk about part of my recent work. And also I want to thank everyone for being here, faculty members of the department, students and guests. Okay. The Great Fire, which erupted in Smyrna, Izmir, on September 13th, 1922, destroyed the Christian neighborhoods of the city. In the following decades, the politics of forgetting and erasure, which shaped the repressive approach of Turkey's ruling elite toward the memories of the non-Turkish and non-Muslim groups, helped build a new Izmir from the ashes of Smyrna. Reflecting on the destruction of Christian Smyrna, Biray Kolluoğlu Kırlı wrote that, I'm quoting from her, "The destruction of the city through fire was an act of creation, an attempt to build places of counter-memory." Perhaps the most poignant case of the creation of new spaces is the construction of a large park, Kültür Park, on what was the new spaces, creation of new spaces is the construction of a large park, Kültür Park, on what was the Armenian quarter, High Notes, as Elinor Morak's research has shown. Kültür Park has been mentioned so many times in many talks, so this is a very simple map. The expelled Greeks and Armenians of Smyrna had a doubly painful experience. On a material level, they were denied being compensated for the physical property that they had lost due to the fire, largely as a result of the new laws and legal practices in Turkey. On a moral level, the implementation of urban renewal projects soon after the fire, like the construction of Kültür Park, erased all spatial reference points for remembering the bygone existence of the pre-1922 non-Muslim inhabitants of the city. In my presentation, I will bring to your attention the testimonies of 3 Armenian survivors of the Smyrna fire and try to shed light on what happened in the Armenian quarter during the days that led to the fire. And also taking these narratives as a reference point, I will discuss certain common motives in Armenian memories of violence. Tatetraviat is Ansel Kurtian, in English, the Notebooks of Angel Kurtian, was published in Athens in 1980. Ansel Kurtian was born in Bursa in 1912. She witnessed her father's dispatch to labor battalions in 1915, her mother's exile to Afyonkarahisar with her 3 daughters, and later their taking refuge in Smyrna, and the burning of the city and their transport to Greece. Kurtian began to write her memoirs in Greek in 1948, long after she settled in Greece with her family, and she worked on her text for about 30 years. She based it on her mother's and other elders' narratives and her own memories. For Ansel, who was a 10-year-old girl in 1922, the memory of Smyrna is associated with a merry atmosphere boosted by the lights of the shops and the sounds of bells coming from the tram or the street vendors. She draws us a picture of prosperity and well manners as she peers into the houses of the wealthy, dining on white tablecloths and served by their servants. As an eyewitness to the plunder and chaos between the 6th and the 15th of September, this image serves to highlight what was lost due to the violence inflicted by Turkish regulars and the army. The pre-catastrophe memory of Smyrna gets brighter when the survivor remembers Smyrna under the 3-year Greek administration. Kurtian remembers the shared joy of the local Greeks and Armenians and depicts an atmosphere of freedom facilitating the socialization of the middle-class Greeks and Armenians who enjoyed the vibrant nightlife in contrast to their self-imposed habit of keeping low profile under Turkish rule. She also remembers the brief Greek occupation of Afyonkarahisar in March 1921 and narrates how local Armenians were filled with overflowing joy at the sight of the Greek soldiers at the fortress of Afyonkarahisar and welcomed them with red carpets and Greek flags. Remembering her impression as a 9-year-old girl, she writes, "I was imagining the Greek soldiers to be superhumans, handsome like the English soldiers, smiling, with clean faces, shining brightly, tall and strong like the ancient statues in the books." After this much hoped for but brief moment of liberation, as she calls it, the Greek army begins to retreat, and upon the advice of a Greek soldier, her mother decides to leave Afyonkarahisar with her 3 children and go to Smyrna via Uşak. In contrast to Kurtian's belated but lifelong engagement with her memoirs, the Armenian doctor Garabet Hacharyan wrote his journal shortly after the Smyrna fire when he fled and took refuge in Greece. His granddaughter Dora Sakayan came across years later an autobiography written in Western Armenian at her uncle's home in Argentine, and published it first in Armenian in Montreal in 1995 and 2 years later in 1997 in English as, with the title, see the second one, An Armenian Doctor in Turkey, Garabet Hacharyan, My Smyrna Ordeal of 1922. The book was then, in 2006, it was translated into German and published in 2006. And I used actually that version because that was the version that I had access to, immediate access to. So I used the German version. And the ones that you see excerpts will be my translation from German into English. Sakayan stresses that her grandfather's journal is not a memoir, but an eyewitness account. Garabet Hacharyan was born in Bardizak in 1876. He went to Constantinople to study medicine, served in the Ottoman army as a physician during the First World War, and after the war moved to Smyrna with his family and worked as a gynecologist at the Armenian National Hospital. As the Greek army evacuated Western Anatolia, his wife's relatives were massacred in Akhisar by Turkish brigands, and Hacharyan lost all his property due to the looting of the Armenian quarter and the burning of Smyrna. He was arrested and detained in Sarıkışla barracks in Smyrna, which no more exists. It doesn't exist anymore, Sarıkışla, later to be released due to his advanced age. Finally, he and his family fled to Mytilene on September the 24th, 1922, and 7 months later moved to Thessaloniki with the prospect of having better job opportunities for himself as a doctor and for providing his children with better education. Minastar Sarkisyan's autobiography, compiled from his notes written in the late 1960s, was published in English by his son in 2010. After his graduation from the Turkish Military Academy, Minastar Sarkisyan served as an artillery officer on the Palestine front in 1917-1918, fighting under the Ottoman flag against the British. A few years later, during the Turkish-French struggle over Cilicia, driven by the dream of retaking Cilicia and protecting the surviving Armenian population, Der Sarkisyan volunteered to command a guerrilla group in Adana against the Turkish forces. After 2 years of fighting for the liberation of Adana in 1921, he returned to Smyrna, where his uncle, a high-ranking priest, Harutyun Der Sarkisyan, resided, and joined General Torkom's Armenian Legion to fight alongside the Greek army against the Turkish nationalist forces. Let's look at now at the three survivors' narratives closely. Before that, I want to just show you. So this is actually part of a new project that's actually a kind of maybe by now well known by some interested group in Turkey. Hrant Dink Foundation has this wonderful project of the Kardes project, the mapping various now lost places in Istanbul and Izmir. They started Izmir, they did it about Ankara. They are like a bit like what Defne was mentioning about their memory walks. They are also, they are preparing a digital, a map, an application actually, which people can download on their mobile, on their phones. And as they download the program, this application, which is called Kardes, when they click, let's say, number 2, they will hear about a story, a narrative about Surp Stefanos Armenian Church. When they click on 2, they will go there, or either they're from their homes. They will hear a narrative or what this place was about. Number 2, number 3, and they prepare this, let's say a digital memory tour maybe about, various cities with, pasts that were erased. So they let me use this very kindly. They had contacted me about Smyrna if I could contribute to their project. I said I would learn more from you than you from me, because I'm not an expert on Izmir, not yet. So they let me use this map, and also they also said that please tell that this is a project in progress and it's not yet finished. So the Deyan Printing House, number 3, the second one, Surp Stefanos Armenian Church, that I will talk, it will pass, in the excerpts that I'll be talking about. The Armenian Hunters Club, number 5, house, Garabet Khacharian's house, approximately the place as they found it from his book. They tried to locate it. It's very difficult to locate, of course. Surp Krikor Lusavoric Armenian Hospital, number 7, and the famous Culture Park, number 8. So this is can be just one map to remind us of, of the places that I'll be talking about. The other one, another map, area of Alsancak, with the places that I'll be referring to. So I'm just keep this in mind, and I'll be talking about now the narratives, the 3 narratives of the 3 survivors more closely. I'll be talking about the first 2 more. Minas Der Sarkisyan, I will refer very shortly because of time concerns. The narratives are quite dense. In her memoirs, Anzel Kurtian depicted the panic and horror in the streets of Smyrna as the Greek army retreated. For the first and only time in her memoirs, she noted the day of the week. It was Wednesday. It must be 6th of September. She wrote, "Trains are bringing the wounded soldiers from the front to the Basmane train station, where they are taken by cars. The streets are red with their blood." She mentions an explosion which creates huge panic. Everybody is running on the streets, not knowing why. The Greek army left their horses, mules, and everything, trying to save themselves not to be prisoners of war. The Greeks close the roads, do not allow anyone to circulate, so that they do not prevent the Greek soldiers to go, and everybody is closed in their houses. Her testimony shows the violence committed by the irregulars before the Turkish regular army entered the city. The Armenian Church of St. Gregory and the buildings of the National Hospital were full of refugees, wounded, and mentally and physically ill people. The Armenian revolutionaries inside the church and the staff of the hospital showed resistance against the Turkish irregulars, but they surrendered when the Turkish army came and threatened to burn them if they did not come out. She describes the horror scene at the courtyard of the hospital, in quote, "Dante's Inferno does not have more to offer." Similarly, for burning Smyrna, Garabet Khacharian uses repeatedly the term the hellish city, from which he wants to get away with his family. According to his testimony, in the evening of September 9th, the Turkish soldiers and the mob began plundering the Armenian quarter Hainots. Hacharian noted that while the Greek neighborhoods had some small raids, the Armenian quarter was completely plundered. He also wrote that as he was passing from the Greek neighborhoods, the Greeks were sitting in front of their doors on the street, and Turkish flags were hung over their houses. From the clock tower of the church of Aios Trifonas, a big Turkish flag was fluttering. In the high notes, breaking into houses, robbery, kidnapping of women, and killings continued for a few days. I want to now read you an excerpt. Garabet Hacharian goes the next day to see his house, what happened in the Armenian quarter. The next day he goes on September the 10th. And he says the following. At 9 o'clock we go, Yervand, Khosrov and I, to High Notes to find out if anything occurred at night. On the way we meet some Armenian teenagers who are foreign citizens. They tell us that the Armenian district of High Notes was robbed and that women and girls had been kidnapped. Also, the Turkish mob and army besieged St. Stephen's Church and the diocese. I reach our house and try in vain to open the door. Somebody destroyed the lock while attempting to break it. The front door and the shutters have remained intact. I knock a few times on my neighbor Levon Arakelyan's door. No one answers. St. Gregory Street is devastated. In front of Miss D. Kasparyan's house, I see a dried-up pool of blood. I continue my way undeterred and get to the main Armenian street, the Grand Boulevard. First, I go by family Balekjian's house. The doors are broken and the furniture lying around in the garden. The front doors to the main street, Grand Boulevard, are smashed in turn and there are traces of blood everywhere. And the narrative thus goes on. He also mentions later that the Turkish mob and soldiers besieged St. Stephen's Church, the main church of the Apostolic Armenians in Smyrna, where where many Armenians had taken refuge. On September the 12th, the Turks began to arrest Armenian men with the charge that they shot Turkish soldiers and showed resistance in St. Stephen's Church. Hacharian writes that on September the 13th at 2 o'clock, a smoke rose from the Armenian quarter. I should also say this, according to, as an eyewitness account, he says that the perpetrator of fire is has Turkish ethnicity. In the following days, he witnesses the huge human loss and glittering buildings of Smyrna turning into ruins, and he says, in quote, "The fire of Smyrna is indescribable and unbelievable." In the recent historiography, the First World War and its aftermath has been championed as the beginning of modern humanitarianism. Yet the Greek and the Armenian survivors' eyewitness accounts of the Smyrna debacle debunk the narrative about the selfless humanitarian efforts of the American and European organizations. As Garabet Hacharian pointed out, while countless people were waiting on the Smyrna quay to be rescued, only the orphans under American care were taken by an American ship and transported to a safer place. Furthermore, these narratives convey a strong resentment against the representatives of the Allied states and those on the European ships docked at the quay who remained spectators to the scene of people squeezed between the fire and the sea. The Armenian doctor cries at the face of the civilized world. The loud music and glaring lights of a French passenger ship at sea stand in dark contrast to the wails of the refugees on the quay and the countless murders committed in the dark of night. The art lovers on the ship make films about the martyrdom of Smyrna to present to their countrymen. For a few days, this operation takes place on all ships. That's how the civilized states of Europe and America show their condolences and their interest in our destiny, instead of providing us with the material and military support that we had hoped from them. Anzel Kurtian was one of the many who took refuge in the Armenian Church of St. Gregory when the Armenian quarter was being looted. In the following, both her deep resentment against the Allied states and her despair and regret about relying on them and about submitting to the Turkish irregulars are evident. I'll read the English one, my translation. We were told that Smyrna does not fall. The foreign powers will not allow. Where are they now? Where are their embassies? Where is mutual aid? Where is their Christian duty? Are they being slaughtered like us? I don't believe it. Curse on their heads. If we knew, we would hand out guns to everyone and say, kill whoever attacks you, because you're not going to live. At least we would kill half of them, and not like this. Like little lambs, we were folded up and devoured. The emphasis is mine there. Rarely one finds also narratives which condemn the responsible from within the community. In his autobiography, Minaster Sarkisyan criticized the Armenian bishop of Smyrna, Gevon Turyan, for giving false and misleading assurances to the Armenian community, causing them to remain in Smyrna and bear the tragic consequences. Furthermore, he wrote that on September the 9th, the day the Turkish army entered Smyrna, Turyan, disguised as a Catholic priest, escaped to Greece on a French battleship. Minaster Sarkisyan's scandalous claim about a community leader with a highly contested legacy shows his resentment and wish to settle accounts with him, as he wrote his autobiography in the late 1960s. It may also be that he wanted to strengthen his position in a major intra-communal strife. In 1933, Archbishop Turyan's murder, due to being disrespectful towards the flag of the First Republic of Armenia in the church that he was serving in Manhattan by members of the Armenian Revolutionary Federation, had divided the Armenian diaspora. But this is totally a different topic, so I'm just touching upon it. This is basically the ideological differences and division between Armenian diaspora communities and their opinions and their views regarding Soviet Armenia, and this is a large debate, so I'm not going into that. Now that's the last part of my talk, and I'm asking a question and trying to answer, and probably I will not be able to answer this question, at least today. Okay, the good Turk amidst narratives of horror, how should we interpret it? In 1921, Anzel Kurtian, her mother, and her two sisters left Afyonkarahisar and, accompanied by their neighbor Artin and his family, started to walk to Uşak. On the way, a Turkish coachman took them on his cart and drove them until they approached his village. Later, accompanied by a Greek cavalryman, the whole group went to a village, knocked on the door of a Turkish house and asked for food and shelter for the night. Next morning, Artin wanted to reward the Turkish household for their impeccable hospitality by giving them money. The emerging scene conveys the persistence of neighborly sentiments from both sides, and Kurtian holds the war responsible for tearing apart the Christians and Muslims of Anatolia. She says the following, in short: my mother went in with the Turkish woman, the lady of the house, to thank her, and they both came out in tears. Then the war. In the Armenian and Greek narratives of the Asia Minor disaster, despite the abundance of individual and collective memories of violence and evil perpetrated by Turkish soldiers, irregulars, or even Turkish neighbors, a kind act of a Turkish official, a peasant, or a Turkish friend is remembered with gratitude. One may say that for the dispersed or displaced survivors of this tragedy, the image of the good Turk is part of the idealized and romanticized view of life in the old country. For Nikolaos Doumanis, however, the fact that in survivors' narratives the Turks are not evil, at least not all of them, indicates that nationalism's victory is not complete. In my view, the issue is more complicated than to what extent nationalism has swept all other discourses. Is the resilience of the discourse, which blames the political elites and the great powers for the plight of the simple Christian folk of Anatolia, due to a universal belief in the goodness of simple people, or is it based on memories of peaceful and harmonious intercommunal relations transmitted from generation to generation? The first explanation draws on the leftist and anti-imperialist view of the Greek-Turkish conflict, which has long life and presence at diverse strata of the Greek society, extending from some of the major literary works produced in Greece in the 1930s to a conversation that you can end up having with a taxi driver. The second one, though, appears in survivors' narratives as a puzzling prelude to the violence that came after, making it all the more difficult to explain why it happened, it being extreme violence, genocide. Genocide, not only genocide, 1915, but also the aftermath. So what does this, basically I'm asking the question, which function does this good Turk motive have in these narratives of violence? Or does it have a function? Okay, but the victim's conscience strives for causality, to know why it happened, for settling questions of justice and accountability. I think there is a crucial difference between how the descendants of the Greek survivors and the Armenian survivors address the question of why it happened. For the first group, the causal framework is set by the Greek occupation of Western Anatolia and the ensuing war between the two armies. For the second group, the Armenian survivors of the genocide and the violence during the Greco-Turkish War, a causality, an explanation of the evil act is often rejected because it poses the danger of casting a shadow on the undescribable horror committed by Turks. Perhaps in his attempt to explain to himself and to his audience why the Armenian quarter of Smyrna was totally plundered and destroyed, or more plausibly, to highlight the Armenians' particular target position in the eyes of the Muslim Turks, Garabet Hacharyan quotes from a conversation among a group of Turkish police officers and soldiers, which he overheard during his detention at the police station. And this also brings us to the point which actually Hamit Bozarslan mentioned yesterday also. Separation between Greece and the Greeks, separation between Greece and Rome, separation between Greece and the Armenians, inside. So I'm quoting and I'm finishing with that. One of the soldiers says, the Greek government is now at war with Turkey. Greece is a state that claims Smyrna. It may one day make friends with Turkey, as was the case with Bulgaria. But how to explain the rebellious behavior and undignified conduct of the Armenians? The Armenian chetes in the area of Smyrna, who after the reoccupation of Smyrna gathered in their church and shot on the Turkish soldiers. One of the soldiers showers the Armenians with a flood of curse. So, thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. We move to the last presentation by Ms. Defne Martoyan. The title of the presentation is From Smyrna to Mytilene, Survival Story of Migirditch Αvedian. Ms. Martoyan is Senior Researcher at the Armenian Genocide Museum, Institute Foundation Memorial Complex of Chiterakaberd in Yerevan. Thank you.
Where did you put it? All right, fine. Excellent. Excellent. This is good. Maybe, I think it's good. It's fine. Excellent.
Αξιότιμοι διοργανωτές και συμμετέχοντες του συνεδρίου, επιτρέψτε μου καταρχάς να εκφράσω τη βαθιά μου ευγνωμοσύνη για αυτή την ευκαιρία. Είναι μεγάλη τιμή να μιλήσω μπροστά σε ένα τέτοιο κοινό. Επιτρέψτε μου να παρουσιάσω την ομιλία μου στα αγγλικά. Σας ευχαριστώ. Dear conference organizers, participants, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure for me to be here together with all of you at this interesting and too important conference. I am really happy to be here among people from different countries, institutions, and organizations. This report was made possible thanks to the efforts of Migirditch Αvedian's great-grandson, George Balekcian, who handed the unpublished memoir of Migirditch Αvedian. Migirditch Αvedian was born in Denizli. For many years, his occupation had been shoemaking. In 1908, he graduated the Bursa State Silkworm Cultivation School and, after years, was selected as a district delegate. Αvedian's birthplace, Denizli, had a great role in the life of the author. At the very beginning, Denizli had a great role in the life of the author. At the very beginning of the memoir, he highlights the fact that he is from Denizli. I am quoting. I am Migirditch Αvedian from Denizli, province of Izmir. I am a shoemaker and shopkeeper, married, I have a child. I wanted to take over a new trade by growing 2 mulberry gardens in the city. Denizli is 8 hours away by train from Izmir. There were 150 Armenian families living there. There were also Greeks, but Turks were a majority. And yet, in such an environment, Armenians were sought for in every province, like a small egg that is a beneficial element for people. I can say that they were the fragrant flower of the country, pleasant to everyone. In his memoir, an important reference is made to some stages of the educational life of the author. The following notes by Αvedian are about the difficulties of reaching to Bursa and studying at the Silkworm Cultivation School in 1906. It was forbidden for Armenians to travel by sea on the day of Red Sultan. In those difficult conditions, I reached Eskişehir by land and railway, and from there took the land road again. I reached Bursa, said Migirditch Αvedian, and got accepted to the Torgomian School of Silkworm Cultivation. After studying there for 2 years, I graduated the school. I returned to the city by a boat of Constantinople. In the same year, the Red Sultan was overthrown. The sea travel was free for Armenians anywhere. There was a Jewish merchant in the city named Chaim Artini, a merchant of raw and processed leather, but also traded silk. We made friends and agreed to be engaged in these 3 fields of business. I outlined the following sections in every overview of key topics. For example, Smyrna's population, according to Αvedian's memoir, involvement of Smyrna's Armenians in the judicial system, merchant class of Smyrna, scientific educational achievements of Smyrna's Armenians, the Young Turks Revolution and the state of Smyrna's Armenians, Migirditch Αvedian as a soldier of the Ottoman army, partial deportations in Smyrna, extermination, etc. In regard to the initial settlement of Armenians in Smyrna, it should be mentioned that they have built the chapel of Saint Joachim Anna in the high-up location of the city and a cemetery near the Turkish quarter. However, it's known that Armenians moved to another quarter named Hainots. Αvedian, highlighting the details of the distribution of Smyrna's multicultural population, reports the population of Izmir consisted of 4 nations. Greeks were the majority, internally and externally. Their dominant language was Greek. The second group were Turks, the third group were Armenians, and the fourth one Jews. There were also smaller groups of other nations. In my opinion, the number of Armenians should have been more than 100,000, according to the statement of the country's head of security. Despite the majority of Greeks, Armenians were vigilantly in charge of both public and national issues of state concern. They wanted to live fulfilled with their insensibility of courage. Αvedian's memoir is noticeably different in its expression of love and appreciation for his people. In his writing, Αvedian shows a particular admiration towards the fields where the Smyrna Armenians played a significant role. The following testimony of Αvedian is about Denizli Armenians in the judicial system. In the court there were Armenian officials and the judge Grigor Efendi Parazamyan from Akshehir. There was Onik Peshtimaljan sitting next to the governor in the management board. Avedian also refers to the merchant class, which gives an opportunity to get insight into one of the peculiar aspects of Smyrna's community. In the 17th, 19th centuries, Smyrna Armenians, Greek and Jewish merchants held dominant positions in Aydin, Alaşehir, Manisa, and Aegean coastal regions. They not only provided the demand for the local, but also European produce in those locations, promoting the development of agricultural production in the Ottoman state. Referring to the involvement of the Armenians in trade, Avedian writes, "The commercial field was dominated by the Armenians. There were Armenians who owned large food storages of 3 large manufactories, whereas our artisans, Armenians and Greeks. The Armenians of Smyrna carried out important activities in the fields such as science, education, publishing, culture, and crafts. There are many cases evidencing about the high level of their social, educational, and intellectual life. Almost all Armenians knew Turkish. Many of them knew Greek, French, Italian, and English. Over the centuries, the local Armenian population had acquired a unique cultural profile. Many graduates of the reputable Mesropian and Rupsimian school later became public, political, cultural, and spiritual figures." Avedian, highlighting the details of Smyrna's educational life, writes, "Smyrna, apart from the Armenian private schools, there was the Mesropian Secondary National School headed by Zakhar Zakarian. There were also the Rupsimian School for girls and Boyajian boarding school for boys from the suburbs. Many Armenian children also attended an American college in Paradiso. In the history of Armenian communities, construction of churches has been a necessary condition and prerequisite for the preservation of the Armenianness. The history of Smyrna's churches greatly contributes to the accurate reproduction of the community's history. Moreover, it acts as a marker in terms of identifying and describing the characteristics and historical phases of the Armenian community. About one of the churches built in Smyrna, Avedian reports the following. There were 2 churches in Smyrna. One was the famous Saint Stephanos, surrounded by its impregnable fortress, and the second one was the Lusavuric Church, built by the Spartalian brothers with their own means. The church was below, and there was a hospital for the poor above. At the entrance of the church, the 2 large statues of the Spartalian brothers were shining opposite each other." Avedian also pays attention to the scientific publishing sector. Referring to the newspapers published in Smyrna, he writes, "There were the Eastern Press and Gavroche dailies, available Brzhishk Monthly, and others. In the overview of scientific educational life, the author is particularly interested in the field of medicine. As follows: the Armenians had a pharmacy operating with the national currency, where the pharmacist Toros Efendi Odabashian was on pension. There was also a Greek pharmacy. In the last years, we had an Armenian doctor named Grigor Efendi Mnatsakanyan, a chemist named Gevorg Terkalustian, and his brother, Abgar Terkalustian." And then he adds, "There were many doctors, but among the notable ones were Dr. Surgeon Spartanyan with his hospital, Dr. Chelebian, a specialist of internal illnesses, as well as doctors Kostanyan and Pashapesyan. There were many Armenian doctors and pharmacists in governors." The author also writes about Armenian veterinary doctors. The general veterinary examiner of the Izmir province was an Armenian, Baytar Artin Efendi, who was the right hand of governors Said and Rahmi Pashas. After the Kemalist capture, he was gunned in Izmir's Sobuk village with doctor chemist Georg Terkalustian and his brother pharmacist Abgar Terkalustian and their 60 friends. Deportation as a constituent part of the genocide process had to include the Armenian population of both Constantinople and Smyrna. But the latter was spared from mass deportations and therefore from extermination, being subjected to partial limited actions. During 1915-1916, the Armenians of Smyrna were forced into partial deportations. Αvedian reports the annihilation of Smyrna Armenians and Greeks are based on eyewitness accounts. He also speaks about the Greek army. The Greek army was victorious. From Smyrna up to Karahisar, I have witnessed the victory of Greeks. Unfortunately, the Europeans impeded their victory, and on the coast of the famous Gordon Pyre of Izmir, the two Greek armored squids, Kilikis and Aprov, stood face to face. Before Kemal's entry, the Europeans were also on the waters of Izmir with their armored ships. The Greek authorities were threatened to remove their armored squad from the seashore and withdraw the artillery powers. Smyrna's Armenians and Greeks ignored all the warnings about their annihilation, considering them to be false and relying on the convincing assurances of the representative of the European state in the city that there was no need to worry. There could not be a massacre because all Christians were under their protection and such things. Migirditch Αvedian was one of those few Armenians who considered the seriousness of the danger real. We read the following on Avedian's realization that Armenians live under dark black clouds. In 1914, when I went to Smyrna on a business, I received a telegram about the attack on the goods. I returned and I found the city in chaos. The telegram sent to us from Mersin confirms that we, Armenians, had lived under black dark clouds. It's irrelevant to write about now undertakings, new business of Armenian anywhere. Migirditch Αvedian writes in the memoir how he and his family were saved by a divine miracle. Together with 28 members of 20 families, we arrived in a village on the Greek island of Mytilene from Smyrna. Indeed, the story of Migirditch Αvedian and his family could not end with their arrival in Mytilene. Relying on trustworthy sources, Αvedian continued to provide details about the situation in Smyrna and the local Armenians. After my departure, Kemal managed to enter Smyrna by first sending villagers on horses and donkeys, then unarmed Turks, and slowly seizing Smyrna, the soldiers were freely moving there. The calmness was ended by the attack of the soldiers on the Christian neighborhoods. Everyone rushed to the seashore to save their lives. Many of them died on the roads. Those who reached the shore threw themselves into the sea and cried for help towards the Europeans. But on the contrary, the educated and humanist Europeans turned back from Armenians and Greeks instead of protecting them. They pushed back into the warm waters those who swam up to their ships. Referring to the arson of Armenian and Greek neighborhood in Smyrna, Αvedian writes, the mob was not satisfied by only burning the church and the hospital. It smashed the statues of philanthropists, poured full of all buildings on its way burning down. and small buildings of a huge area. And now they blame Armenians for this arson, but those who witnessed it know who were the arsonists. The 93-year-old narrator has written down interesting details. I stayed in Cordelio, watching with binoculars from the seashore how at 6 o'clock in the morning the Greek army, holding their weapons down, walked to the seashore of the famous Cordon Pier. Contrary to the earlier agreement with the prefecture, the Greek army was made by the armed Turks from sea and land. Encountering Turks, they advanced to occupy the official positions. Within 24 hours, peace reigned in Izmir and the city came under the control of the Greek army. Αvedian made the decision to move from Denizli to Smyrna when, according to his definition, he found the intentions to Turks being poisoned towards Christians. And yet, within 24 hours, the looting had reached extreme levels, especially in the Turkish markers. Seeing this situation, I decided to immediately go to Denizli and transfer my family to Izmir. About this, now I have a video of son Migirditch Αvedian, Sarkis Αvedian, who will speak in Armenian, and I have already...
İzmir'i çarten, yergor araç, göborote voriyet, bizi Türkkan at yediren. Uremen, yerek özellikle, miyat safar, arakasana o geranan Türkiye'ye, yevgahasın, bu nasda, bu nasda gımına, hazar inar mince kısan ve, Akçırçanın ilk kroça Akçıga Amerika'yı, Epidemikler bu pokatı Amerika'yı Nuyçuk orelun nekati şuşugu mette duka kuma bana sara duner duka yere varen vorbesi hayır havaken danin hayatsan hayır ki vorose vor yes biletam hayatsan çivi taparın oda verdiğinleri uremen hayır kıstesi aşağıda var aşağıdaki birçok maketler uzayacak mı? Beraber yevatı kanıtı beslenme ilk dosyalar lalu aşağıdan ki anelo abelu amar ve bütün erkekler ye bu erkekler en çoğunlar masakizasyon mu var? Selamatuzyan Pad bagagan uner Gerçekten kelam atlatırken bagagan inemamıra ileri kozma hakkını. Vorok yamarak abeluk Türkçe'nin gönderceste Yerevani Sidvarütünleri Sirov Dörtüne Atkolora Pay Aymisi Sidvarütüne Arapça Gıkatli Vor İspana Vortuna Yervezi Sovortuna Hagaya Tatkin Olma Kahve yapar Negeresi gahacahe, irengi perne beraberagi bera araslatuşun bir karoz etmişleri. Aç barakayı hayat gömece önerik senarga, mevzele ve gete yesas gömezate vor asyece Türk bizi elleri. Yevarisi bulunana orba gahacahe, hayat Türk şeyleri orinavor sevov Yerevan'ın buka Oğagi hale yevgamana hos bir yanki bırakıyor. Buradan ilk aşağıdan ki Gatni fayda bacar gella. At fayda bacar Allah'ın minçe bir voros tarik var tabakları çapas gella. İlk soğursun ne korte gena. İlk soğursun ne yanki met Yoronamol Allah'la. Amen or yegeresi Aras patarukyan nerga gıkıtırı adu yer giragi orele manava. Kolor ilgante neberase asıdo aosnero İrmiçev gelkin veçe ak uçak abresav çoragav tüm gayette aslında bu inke polon sıçvarı sümeret aslat azades yevgâke miçev hayu garegan gabri.
Migirditch Αvedian, in his memoir entitled Memories of Life of Various Hardship Preserving an Armenian Family, writes, "We have our strong will and creative mind, which can make us happy in the world by creating our free and independent homeland that was so much yearned for by our ancestors." In his memoir, he ended his memoir with these words, "Armenians, do you want to stand firm on your positions in this world? Be naive like a dove and smart like a fox, because being creative is not enough in order to keep and strengthen it." And this three-voice liturgy in a memory of Greeks and Armenians in Smyrna was recorded and published in 1898 in Smyrna by the Armenian well-known composer Levon Chilingirian. Thank you very much.
So thanks very much to all the presenters. And now we have time for discussion and questions and answering by the authors. Yes, please.
A question and remark to Defne and Özgür. I enjoyed very much the three talks, but yours was giving some hope for some improvement of the ideological climate in Turkey. Can you be more specific about the impact of your memory walks and about your interactions with a broader public? Can you confirm a hope, or would you make it relative? Thank you.
Would I make it, what did you say? Relative. I don't know how to do it, as I'm only the novelist. So I can give you my observations only, and also I can give you my personal fears. When I wrote this book, I thought there will be a lot of people coming against me, which happened to be the opposite. So I have a few, again, I think without speaking of gender, we cannot speak of anything, because there's the book, the literature is read by women mostly, at least in Turkey. A book written by a woman is definitely read by women in Turkey. So I'm trying to be very, very careful making generalizations and coming into conclusions, especially in front of you all who are seeing things much more layered than I do, most likely. But there is hope, like you said. There is a lot of inclination and desire to see the past, and I believe this is because of the present day, because the present day revealed itself such a untruth, and people, like, there's no escape of not seeing that. Everybody is aware present is, let's not say lie, but an untruth. So from there, it's just a little bit of a jump. The past was the same too. And then, like books like mine, and it's not just mine, there are movies, other books, there's a whole confrontation culture developing in the 21st century Turkey. We have to acknowledge that, and I really appreciate all my fellow artists and writers in working on this. And there is the, let's say, quote-unquote consumer of these products. So there is some open-mindedness, but again, like I said, oh, I never knew this was what is buried under the earth then. Now I'm seeing the space in a very new light, blah, blah, this kind of thing. So far is not translating into, let's say, Kurdish issue. Let's say to Armenians. let's say to Dersim. There is, even to present-day Syrian refugees, okay, there is still, there's a boundary, okay? There's a special interest in revisiting the Greeks. You can see in every cultural space right now produced by Turkey, there's re-embracing the Greeks' past, with the club being a Netflix production and looking at the September events for the first time from a Turkish production. But that is very limited to Greeks in a strange way. So is it going to extend? We'll see. But it's a beginning, and I'm still thinking it in an optimistic way. I don't know if it answered particularities of your question.
Okay, maybe a follow-up on this question. Have you noticed any difference on what you write between the two main political streams in Turkey? Those that have read the book belonging to the two main political streams in Turkey, you know, the Islamists and the Kemalists. Have you noticed any difference of their reflection on your book?
No, I actually didn't see the difference. But again, as a novelist, you're always behind the stage. You know, you don't know what's really going on in the lives of the readers, unless nowadays they write to you. Because there's not really a literary critic anymore in Turkey. You know, everybody's being paid to write literary critics, so you don't know what's really happening. When the readers write to you from social media, then I have a little bit of more understanding of what's really happening. But then they never tell me what party they are supporting, because it's a very, from a human standpoint, now, very rough thing. But when I look at the covered women, let's say, women who are not necessarily, of course, Erol supporters, let's not make a generalization, but there is almost equal, because I'm always dealing with women here, there's almost an equal interest in the women who are choosing to cover their heads for religious reasons and the secularists. I can only give you this much.
Okay, thank you. So, please.
Thank you so much for all these wonderful presentations. I have maybe a follow-up on exactly this relating to the presentation. I think this idea of literature and art as a way to connect to other burning issues in the interesting, and that's one indication of it. Also, among the expositions organized in this year, actually in connection to September 9th. And that was the big exposition about Ahmed University, the well-known and very controversial Turkish artist, who was called, the exposition was called okay? If we look at the actual text within the exposition, there is no sort of mentioning, there is no going into the concepts involved there, and they are not sort of going into the distinct questions of the sentence of society, but it's very clear understanding. And the exposition also deals with migration, and the migration, sort of the human disasters connected to migration. So it's a very clear interconnection of our tools that we prefer in what we prefer, which is very difficult. So it seems like I really can see that some sort of new initiative, and it is not serious, into our immediately after the industry.
Yes, I want to add to that. That's really at the center of our book tours, the exhibition. And inside the exhibition space, you have a boat, a real normal-sized boat, like the ones that we always see in the photos of the Smyrna refugees trying to escape or trying to reach to the European big cruises. And in the boat, you see suitcases, 1922 suitcases, the style, shoes, piled up all the way to the ceiling. And he built this thing in the middle of the old Greek neighborhood. and it was a very popular exhibition. So I see art and literature, the Trojan horse, I call it. You know, you enter the idea, but because people react, you know, people react if you go in a propaganda way and say that, you know what happened. And this is also being done in Turkey. A lot of confrontation workshops are trying to say, face it and confess it and apologize. And this is not working as far as I understand. So what's really working is like we need a shift in the perspective. And it can, in my opinion, only be done through literature and art. And that's what we're seeing now. And I, again, will say it's a hopeful thing. Do you want to add anything?
Just a small feedback or info, let's say, from an academic point of view. Yes, definitely there's hope, because, I mean, 20 years ago, probably you wouldn't publish a PhD or master thesis regarding the non-Muslim communities from a critical point of view in Turkey. Well, it would be so hard. But in the last, I mean, hocalarım da burada gayet iyi biliyorlar. In the last 15 to 20 years, there's a growing literature in academia, observing the micro lives of ordinary people from different ethnic and religious communities, and which interrogating them in political and private sphere and public sphere. So this gives us also tells us that these communities, either Jewish, Greek Orthodox, Armenian, are not homogeneous communities. I mean, they are segregated like by class or by their gender identity. And this is a really growing and fruitful literature. So yes, there is hope. And it will be more, I hope, by next week.
Okay, please. Okay, maybe if there is another question. Okay, two questions more. Please, Elçin Macar.
For ideas, something
Κύριε Κάνε. Yes, please.
I have one question to Defne and the comment on yes, comment. My first question, Defne. So you mentioned empathy. You didn't mention guilt, and my question is on guilt. Do you think those the art works or what the artists or the literature people do will come one day to the point of maybe these sessions will be like therapy, turn into therapy, trauma therapy, and accepting the guilt? And I'm referring to the Holocaust literature here. I don't know. I guess the audience understood what I mean. And the second thing is that the comment. I think it's easy to celebrate Greek, rabbinical Greek food, etc. after wiping all the Rum community of Istanbul. Now there are 2,000. Thank you.
In the long run, yes, I think like the country of Turkey is suffering from a real schizophrenic situation, and underneath that is the guilt, the unknowing, the let's say sins buried under the earth. And I think, I mean, even at an individual level, like if you go and look and search what, you know, how your family was involved in all of these things, instead of like repeatedly speaking the same family history of, you know, they came from Thessaloniki, they from Crete and this and that, like just finding out what they were doing in 55, in 64, in 22, that will heal individuals one by one. And I think as a whole country, we need a lot of healing. Guilt is not a healthy emotion, and it's not my objective to create guilt in people. But being aware of its existence is a good thing, because that's the only way, that's the first step to get rid of it. And of course, facing and apologizing if there is any space to apologize. It's also a healing thing. Yeah. One thing you said, one more thing, what was that?
I said it's easy to celebrate, you know.
Oh, that's and I agree with Dilek. But at the same time, the question is, shall we have it, shall we not have it? Shall we have it as a smaller, or like, because right now in Turkey we are at a state, you either have it, you don't have it. So even if it's huge, even if there's a very annoying cat meow in it, I still prefer that it's there. I still prefer that they produce club instead of not producing it. So I'm somewhere there, and I totally hear your being like, what is that, exploitative issues. Yeah. Still, I'm like, let's do it.
Okay. One last question.
That's a good question. The answer is no, not yet. But I also don't have a lot of hope from any governmental sources in this time of our lives anymore. There's a lot of interest from the local organizations, local platforms. For example, we started these walks with an organization called Nomad Mind, and they are shaped in 2013. They've been trying to create awareness about the space and history in Izmir. Last year, Bayetav, another foundation, which is called Bir Arada Yaşarız Eğitim ve Toplumsal Araştırmalar Vakfı. Altogether, they become Bayetav. Basically, in English, we can live together. The foundation of we can live together. So they made this video that I showed you. So more and more, you know, like more grassroots organizations, NGOs, platforms are showing interest, and that's where the power will come from, in my opinion.
There is one exception in the historiography in 1969 in Çankaya, where Falih Rıfkı Atay openly states, and this is important. I don't know if his book was then after was forbidden. I don't think.
It was gone for a while. Now it's back.
Yeah.
Like it was there. İzmir'i neden yakıyorduk? And then it disappeared for 20, 30 years. We didn't see that. Now.
So thank you very much. And now the floor is to Dr. Hervé Georgelin to conclude up the whole conference. Thank you.
Thank you.
So this will not be long. I'm supposed to make some concluding remarks. It's not a gender-neutral situation. I was given this privilege by my colleagues. But this does not mean that my colleagues were passive at all. So dear colleagues, dear participants to our conference, Smyrna as a symbol. I will try to make a few concluding remarks. I will not try to mention everyone, but I hope you may recognize some of your input in the following thoughts. I first of all thank all of you for your active participation. All sessions were rich and well attended. I want to thank again our selfless students of our Department of Turkish Studies. And I think the organizing committee is very happy about the practical aspects of our academic event. As far as content is concerned, I think our conference was the best organized by our department ever, and certainly a distinct one among all the academic meetings which took place in Greece and elsewhere about Smyrna and the city's destruction this year or the year before. And why is it so? Certainly because of the international and open quality of our program. We heard communications from various countries in different languages and from various points of view. And I'm very grateful to all people who came from Turkey especially. I believe that we managed to reduce the common pathos about the history of the gone-by time. However, it would be shallow to omit the violent and structurally deleterious aspects of the regimes that pretended to rule over Smyrna and non-Muslim inhabitants of Western Asia Minor. In the same lines, we did mention the Muhajir, that is, all Muslims, even only Greek-speaking ones, constrained to move away from the places they considered their homes from the late 18th century until 1924. We all felt that cosmopolitanism, with its glittering aura in retrospect, and possibly the nostalgia it inspired to non-Muslim refugees, or even today's inhabitants of Izmir, is a problematic term. The plurality of inhabitants, languages, religions, habits in the Aegean city was certainly not a peaceful or static social arrangement, similar to a charming postcard. The situation of Ottoman Smyrna at the meeting point of, on the one hand, the old Islamic anthropological order of submission, and Hamid Boğazaslan used the word humiliation, of non-Muslims by the true believers of the one and only true and complete form of monotheistic faith, did collide with the new dynamics of the semi-colonial capitalist expansion course of Western Europe. France, Britain, Italian lands, and then Italy, German lands, and then Germany and Austria and Hungary, and finally the US imposed their imprint on this harbor, certainly much more than in other places in the inner territories of the Ottoman Empire. In the collision of the two systems of domination and regulation, the existence of Smyrna did receive its quite unique character. One could escape the Ottoman symbolical and political order in seeking the protection of course, imperialist Western powers that had managed to benefit from the capitulations. Local Christians and Jews, even if only nominal Christians for Western Christians, convinced of their doctrinal and ritual superiority, even if degenerated Jews for the agents of the Alliance Israélite Universelle, managed to combine the heritage of protected separateness while escaping the humiliation thanks to this situation. If we look at remote places like Diyarbakir, social dynamics were not so favorable to non-Muslims, although there may have been a majority, absolute or relative, within the city. Classical Islam or traditional Ottoman social order do not take care of numbers. A raya is a raya, a zimmi is a zimmi, whatever the proportion of religious groups at a given place. The major presence of the West in its diversity and in its ambiguity, what I mean is certainly capitalism, but also the ideas of enlightenment. So this ambiguous presence in Smyrna opened up the stalemate for non-Muslims, and I know that some Muslim inhabitants did benefit too from this ephemeral situation. All had in Smyrna or Izmir a better chance of getting formal education, learning a foreign language, conducting business, learning skills, accessing to better hygiene and medical care than in remote areas in the interior provinces. That not all of them benefited from this possibility is all too evident, but these are anachronistic demands in the 19th century and possibly afterwards. Yavur Izmir certainly reversed the normal order of things. Smyrna went beyond the Tanzimat and endangered the symbolical and practical domination of the Ottoman elite, proud of their Turkish and Islamic heritage. It was certainly the double focus of admiration, but also envy and irritation, if not outright hatred, for this social group, dominant on the paper, dominant through state-related occupations, but often disinterested in lucrative business, trade, and industry. I understand their frustration. After all, as members of national state-sponsored academia, we probably aren't very different from them. In these neoliberal times, we are obliged to look for resources, once indifferent, outside of the state budget. And this is my renewed and short tribute to Efikaner. This is a new time and pride-consuming activity which we are not all able to devote ourselves to. Thank you, Effie. The special geographical place made by the perspective of final dis-Ottomanization of Smyrna, so the special geographical place made the dis-Ottomanization of Smyrna a realistic perspective. As of 1913, Greece became a direct neighbor. Chios was under Hellenic rule, and the Greek-speaking Orthodox coast of Asia Minor could have followed suit. Greeks, or Romi, Rumlar, were not discreet about their political and national or nationalist passions. Smyrna was a place where new and bold symbolical affiliations could be proclaimed, hoisting a Hellenic flag on one's house, shop, school was a minor but a visual and decisive step towards a new affiliation. Demonstrating full support to the Hellenic army by collecting funds and sending money to Hellenic forces at war with the empire elsewhere, for instance in Thessaly in 1897, or even embarking to join the Hellenic army were quite telling facts about the ideological shifts that had already taken place in the minds of the most numerous Izmir group in Smyrna. The CUP aimed at stopping the drifting apart of Izmir. As a positivist, organicist, and social Darwinist organization, it would not hesitate to implement any means to this end, demanding intertitles in silent films to be written in the Ottoman language and with the Persian Arabian alphabet was only a sign of reaction. It was meaningful because only a minority of Smyrna residents knew this writing system, even among the Muslim population. But it did alarm the French diplomats posted at Smyrna. They analyzed this demand as a bad omen for the precarious balance of their city, and rightly so. The violence experienced elsewhere in the empire from the aftermath of the Second Balkan War until 1918 was unknown in Smyrna. The vicinity, however, was not spared by ethnic rearrangement. I am certainly sympathetic to the anguish in which local Armenians had to live during World War I, knowing that the bulk of their people was assassinated or sent to a certain death on deportation roads to the Syrian deserts. The relative miracle of Smyrna, emerging almost untouched from World War I, made the port city all the more desirable for appetites unleashed after the Ottoman defeat. From the first days after the Mudros armistice, local Greeks did not conceal that they deemed the Ottoman sovereignty an illegitimate situation. Armenians, both locals but also the survivors converging to their city, could not support the continuation of their status quo. Who can contest the legitimacy of their point of view? The landing of Greek troops is certainly an epochal landmark for all groups involved. We heard during this conference that the Entente was no harmonious group of victors. The bold policy of expansion applied by Venizelos and probably supported by Britain and accepted by France at first was a perilous undertaking. It would have required continuity, consistency, and persistence from the Hellenic state. The Greek populations, both in the Hellenic motherland and in the Ottoman provinces, occupied and administered by Greece, and there were no such things. Whatever the qualities of Aristis Zariadis, whatever the grandiose plans for the equipment of Hellenic Smyrna in the service of all residents, at least on the paper, the University of Ionia is the most magnificent and tragical example of Greek ambitions to embody modernity. The lack of political commitment at home and the lack of diplomatic consistency internationally doomed the Smyrna adventure to failure. Ottoman or post-Ottoman agency cannot be underrated. Mustafa Kemal was not a self-made man. He was an Ottoman military hero from the Dardanelles battle onward, a Ghazi in the most classical terminology of Islamic political and military order. His mission, bestowed on him by the Sultan, is a striking example of subversion. Instead of supervising the dismantlement of the Ottoman army and inspecting the disarmament of the vanquished Ottoman state, he preserved and reinforced the military organization, gaining autonomy or seizing autonomy from the center with the backing of the military, the local Muslim population, and certainly those who benefited from the genocidal processes against the non-Muslims in the provinces. Who had any interest in settling old accounts otherwise than preventing by any means the return of Armenian or Greek survivors to their former homes, pretending to recuperate their former assets? It's only obvious that these political dynamics, which was new as far as the marginalization of sultanic authority was concerned, but in fact much in the continuation of the CUP ideological plans and of the Ottoman army's traditions, magnificently countered the expansionist avarice of the small Hellenic state. I'm fascinated by the support of the Bolsheviks that was brought to what they deemed a proletarian movement of liberation, while an Ottoman officer simply did not accept the loss of a piece of Dar el-Islam to former Izmir. The arson of Smyrna, turning the city to a burnt-down and thus purified place to be rebuilt, is the episode that crystallizes memory in Greece and among concerned Armenians. It's quite unbelievable that some may persist in demanding an ultimate written proof of the responsibility of the Kemalist armed forces, both regular and irregular, in the destruction of the city. These, I want to believe, naive demands ignore the practice of secrecy of the CUP and its heir Kemalist movement. Marrying a Turkish lady or teaching Turkish history does not necessitate to espouse state denialism, which is only the prolongation of blatant violence perpetrated from 1913 onwards. I want to put this attitude in contrast with the accessibility of French, but not only, documents on violence committed by the occupying and retreating Hellenic army in the interior lands. There is no taboo, no limits, but to research about these topics in French or British archives. If Greek pupils do not learn sufficiently about it, I know that some groups in the Greek society are not so naive as to believe that the occupation went smoothly. Until now, I have never been prevented to teach the truth about these unflattering phenomena, and I'm devoting to teaching further this aspect of history. Demanding the ultimate proof and recusing the imperfect one, because absolute doubt is always presented as legitimate, is a pervert attitude. I think of Mark Nishanian's book, which should be translated in Greek and Turkish, La perversion historiographique, une réflexion arménienne, published in 2015. Demanding proofs from the victim of a crime, which implies denial, is a comfortable and very conformist attitude. Do not think a second that the German elite, illuminated by guilt, remorse, or Christian introspection, Protestant introspection, would have renounced the benefits of eliminating the Jews or expanding their state to an infinite Lebensraum, if not vanquished. As far as modern Izmir is concerned, I want to say that this is a place I find pleasant, similar to disfigured Piraeus, even without a fire, with a surprising resemblance with modern-day Thessaloniki. I was intrigued by the ideas of overwriting history in commemorations, actually a prolongation of denialism to this day. I was charmed by the quality of the expression fragmentary palimpsest of the urban fabrics. A colleague of ours suggested yesterday, as if reality resisted distortion despite all human and inhuman efforts of putting the past in a filtered and a convenient perspective. This is a touch of optimism we owe to Dilek Kaya, but also to Defne, Suman, and Özgür. I don't remember your family name. And I'm very happy to conclude with that. Thank you for your presence, participation, and attention, even until the very end of this very long conference. Thank you so much.
Κυρίες και κύριοι, αγαπητοί συνάδελφοι, αγαπητοί φοιτητές, μετά από ένα όμορφο ταξίδι 2,5 ημερών στη Σμύρνη, φτάσαμε στο τέλος. Θα θέλαμε πρωτίστως να ευχαριστήσουμε τους ομιλητές που ήρθαν από μακριά, από διάφορες χώρες, από την Τουρκία, και αυτούς που υπάρχουν και συνάδελφοι που ήρθαν από την Τουρκία μόνο και μόνο για να το παρακολουθήσουν. Είμαστε ευγνώμονες και τους ευχαριστούμε θερμά. Πρέπει να ευχαριστήσω όμως τους φοιτητές μας, διότι χωρίς τη βοήθειά τους, χωρίς τη γραμματιακή υποστήριξη, χωρίς την συμμετοχή τους από το πρωί μέχρι το απόγευμα, μέχρι το τέλος των συνεδριών εδώ, θα ήταν πολύ δύσκολο να πραγματοποιήσουμε αυτό το συνέδριο. Τους ευχαριστούμε από καρδιάς. Ελπίζω αυτές οι μέρες του συνεδρίου να ήταν παραγωγικές για σας και τα διαλύματα πολλές φορές βοηθούν στην ανταλλαγή απόψεων και ιδεών. Πρέπει να ομολογήσω ότι συμμετείχα πριν πάρα πολλά χρόνια σε ένα ερευνητικό πρόγραμμα για τη φωτιά της Σμύρνης, The Burning of Smyrna, μεταξύ πανεπιστημίων από την Ελλάδα και από την Τουρκία. Έχουν περάσει αρκετά χρόνια και βλέπω, χαίρομαι, ότι οι έρευνες σχετικά με διάφορες θεματικές της Σμύρνης έχουν προχωρήσει πολύ. Ελπίζω τα πρακτικά του συνεδρίου μας να είναι μια συμβολή στην ιστοριογραφία της Σμύρνης. Περιμένουμε να μας στείλετε τις ανακοινώσεις σας στο τέλος Σεπτεμβρίου. Θα σας στείλουμε λεπτομέρειες σχετικά με τον αριθμό σελίδων. Απλά λέμε από τώρα το χρονικό πλαίσιο που θα είναι τέλος Σεπτεμβρίου και θα σας στείλουμε τις λεπτομέρειες. Σας ευχαριστούμε όλους από καρδιάς που μας βοηθήσατε να πραγματοποιήσουμε αυτό το ταξίδι που στην αρχή φαινόταν σαν να είναι δύσκολο να πραγματοποιήσουμε. Σας ευχαριστούμε όλους πολύ. Değerli katılımcılar, değerli meslektaşlarım, 2,5 gün süren bu İzmir'e yolculuğumuz burada son buluyor. Bütün katılımcılara ve kongremizi izlemeye gelenlere, özellikle Türkiye'den gelen kişiler var, teşekkürlerimizi sunuyoruz. Ayrıca bu kongre için çok emeği geçen öğrencilerimize candan teşekkürler. Umarım kongre günleri sizin için verimli geçti. Ve kongremizin tutanakları umarım İzmir tarihi yazımında önemli bir katkı olur. Çünkü epey yıl evvel Türkiye ile Yunanistan arasında üniversiteler arasında bir araştırma programına katılmıştım. The Burning of Smyrna. Ve o yıllardan bu yana İzmir üzerindeki araştırmalarda çok önemli gelişmeler oldu. Çok memnunum ve umarım kongremizin tutanakları İzmir'in tarih yazımında önemli bir katkısı olur. Şimdi katılımcılara konuşmalarını Eylül sonunda bize yollamalarını rica ediyoruz. Daha detayları, sayfa numaraları, sayfa sayısı üzerinde biz size yazacağız. Maalesef bölüm başkanı Profesör Bayan Leonids'la bakanlıkta bir işi var. Bir araştırma programına katıldığı için bugün özellikle bakanlığa, Milli Eğitim Bakanlığı'na gitmesi gerekiyordu. Ve size selamlarını sunuyor. Hepinize çok teşekkür ederiz. Belki de başka bir kongrede görüşmek üzere. Çok çok teşekkürler. Θέλω να συμπληρώσω κάτι. Η κυρία Σελά, ξέρουμε όλοι, λόγω του ΚΟΥΠΟΥ βρίσκεται αυτή τη στιγμή στο Υπουργείο. Δεν μπόρεσε να μας αποχαιρετήσει. Μας διαμήνυσε να το κάνουμε εμείς. Εκφράζουμε λοιπόν τους χαιρετισμούς της Προέδρου του Τμήματος, της καθηγήτριας κυρίας Ελένης Σελά.
Dear colleagues, I'd like to express in my turn my deep gratitude first to my colleagues in the organizing committee and the students who upheld and supported this endeavor the best way. And I mean every word I pronounce. But for them, this conference would be impossible to be held the way it was held. Many thanks also to all the participants for their excellent contributions and the audience for being here and attending the conference. Thank you very much. Thank you, Hervé, for this comprehensive summary of the conference, and thank you all for your presence. But I am always preoccupied. I have the unpleasant task of being preoccupied with the practical aspects of things. So, as Emilia just said, we intend to publish a collective volume with the acts of the text presented here on peer reviewing. It will be not just the acts, but a collective volume containing the presentations. For that reason, you are kindly requested to send your article by the end of September. And we'll be informed about the details of the text, the way they shall be written, the word limit, etc., by mail next week, in the next days. And I have also to underline that we take this deadline very, very seriously. Thank you very much, all of you. I have to be the bad guy of the serial, excuse me. So there is a lunch outside. Everyone is invited. Thank you very much again.
Υπάρχει ένα σύντομο γεύμα, açık bir büfe var. Hepinizi bekliyoruz. Tekrar teşekkürler. Herkese teşekkürler. Konuşmalarımızı dışarıda sürdürebiliriz.